Hello and welcome to IgniteLife Consulting. You're listening to the Aussie Student Journey, a podcast series where we explore the real international student experience in Australia. I'm Zering, and if you're listening right now, there's a good chance Australia is already somewhere in your mind. Maybe it's just a small thought, something you haven't said out loud yet. Maybe it's a plan you're quietly building, saving links, watching videos, thinking late at night when everything is quiet. Or maybe you're already here, already studying, already working things out, and you're wondering how this journey even started in the first place. This podcast is about the real international student experience, not just the paperwork, not just the visas, but the emotions, the doubts, the responsibility, and the small, often invisible moments that slowly shape who you become. In this series, I'll be speaking with Pema. She's from Bhutan and has been in Australia for about 6 months now, studying a master's degree. She's still early in the journey, and that's exactly why her perspective matters, because it's honest, fresh, and very real. Today's episode is about early dreams and motivation, that quiet moment when the idea of studying overseas first appears, before forms, before agents, before flights. Pema, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Zorang. It feels really nice to be here. Talking about this takes me much further back than I usually think about.
And that's exactly why I wanted to start here, because when people look at international students, they usually see the outcome. They see the visa approval, the airport photos, the arrival story, but they rarely see how long the idea lived quietly inside you before any of that happened. So today, I really want us to slow this down. No rushing, no jumping ahead. Let's go right back to the very beginning, before Australia was a destination, before it was a plan, before it became something you had to explain to anyone else. When you think back now, do you remember the first time the idea of studying overseas crossed your mind? Not as a decision, but just as a thought?
Yes, and it didn't arrive as a plan. It arrived very quietly, almost like a question I wasn't expecting.
That's important, because most life-changing decisions don't start with certainty. They start with curiosity or even discomfort. Take us back to that time. What did life look like around you then?
I had a good life in Bhutan, working locally, surrounded by the familiar. It was a safe, predictable world where nothing was ever truly bad, but there was a persistent ache I couldn't explain. A feeling that I was becoming too comfortable in a world that was no longer challenging me to grow.
And that's such a common place to be. Life is fine, everything makes sense on paper, yet there's this quiet awareness that something else might exist beyond what you know, not necessarily better, just bigger. Is that close to what you were feeling?
Yes, exactly. It felt like my world was small, not in a negative way, just defined, like the boundaries were already drawn and I could see them clearly.
That feeling of having your future already outlined, it can be comforting, but it can also feel limiting, especially when you're someone who wants to grow. Did you try to ignore that feeling at first?
Yes, I told myself to be grateful. I reminded myself that many people would be happy with this life, but the feeling didn't disappear.
And often, instead of disappearing, it quietly grows. What started feeding that feeling for you?
I started noticing people around me. Friends who had gone abroad were changing, not just in their careers, but in how they spoke and how confident they seemed.
So it wasn't about comparing success, it was about observing personal growth, seeing people become more capable, more independent, more sure of themselves.
Yes, relatives would come home on holidays and share stories too. Stories about working part-time, paying rent, living independently in a different culture. They talked about struggling at first, but also about becoming stronger.
That's such an important contrast, struggle and growth existing together. It shows that the journey isn't glamorous all the time, but it changes you. How did hearing those stories affect you personally?
It made me curious, not envious, just curious about who I could become in a similar environment.
And curiosity is powerful because it doesn't demand immediate action, but it keeps asking questions. Was there a specific moment when that curiosity became clearer for you?
Yes, one evening stands out very clearly.
Take us there.
I was sitting in my room. The house was quiet. I was scrolling on my phone, reading articles, looking at universities overseas, not seriously, just curious. And then the thought appeared clearly. What if I studied in Australia?
That single question can quietly change everything, because once it appears, it doesn't rush you, but it also doesn't let go. What did that question do to you over the following days and weeks?
It stayed with me. Some days I tried to push it away, telling myself it was unrealistic or too risky, but other days it felt impossible to ignore. It followed me into quiet moments, right before sleep, and even during ordinary routines. The thought would just return, gently reminding me that maybe there was something more waiting for me.
And that's the stage many students get stuck in, the space between dreaming and deciding, not escaping their life, but wanting to expand it. Till now, we talked about that first quiet question, the moment curiosity appeared and refused to leave. What I want to explore now is what happens after that. Because once a question stays with you long enough, it starts demanding more than curiosity. It asks for reasons. It asks for honesty. So let's move into that next stage. At some point, the question usually changes from what if to why. Why this path? Why this country? Why now? When your curiosity about studying overseas started turning into something more serious, how did you begin answering that for yourself?
The first thing I asked myself was whether this was just a passing idea or something deeper. I didn't want to make such a big decision based on excitement alone, so I started questioning my own motivation.
That self-checking is important because excitement can be loud, but it doesn't always last. Motivation has to survive stress, uncertainty, and responsibility. When you looked closely at your reasons, what did you discover? I realized that my interest wasn't about escaping my life. It was about growth. I wanted to learn in a different environment. I wanted to be challenged in ways I hadn't experienced before. That distinction matters a lot. Running away from something rarely leads to clarity, but moving toward growth usually does. At what point did Australia specifically start standing out for you? Australia felt balanced. It wasn't just about rankings or reputation. It was about how education and life seemed to work together here. Balanced is a word I hear often from students. Not too rigid, not too extreme. What did balance mean to you in practical terms? I read that students here are expected to think independently, to question ideas, to participate in discussions. That mattered to me. I didn't want an education where I memorized information and repeated it in exams. I wanted to understand concepts and apply them. There was also the lifestyle. Students worked part-time while studying. They learned to manage time, money, and responsibility. That combination is powerful. Education isn't just what happens in a classroom, it's how you learn to manage your life alongside your studies. For many students, that's where confidence really develops. As these ideas started forming, did your motivation change? Yes. At first, motivation felt like excitement. Later, it became quieter, more serious, more responsible. That's such an important shift. Early excitement is about possibilities. Later motivation is about commitment. When motivation becomes quieter, it usually means the decision is becoming real. Did that change how you thought about your future? Yes. I started thinking less about the idea of studying overseas and more about what it could lead to. Not a specific job, but a sense of capability. That's something I want to pause on for a moment. Many students feel pressure to name a job title early: engineer, analyst, manager. But often what they're really seeking is confidence and options. Was that true for you? Very much. I wasn't imagining a specific role, I was imagining flexibility. I wanted to feel comfortable in professional spaces, not intimidated. I wanted skills that mattered internationally, skills that didn't limit me to one place. That's a long-term way of thinking, not just about employment, but about identity.
about who you become when you navigate unfamiliar environments. As that vision became clearer, reality usually steps in, and often reality comes in the form of finances. What was that moment like for you?
It was confronting. Tuition fees, living costs, flights, health insurance. The dream suddenly had numbers attached to it.
And numbers change the emotional weight of a decision very quickly. Dreams feel light, budgets feel heavy. How did that affect you personally?
I felt guilty, even before asking my family for support. I kept asking myself whether it was fair to them, whether the sacrifice was worth it.
That guilt often shows how deeply students care about their families. It's not just an individual decision, it's shared responsibility. When you spoke to your family, how did those conversations shape your thinking?
My family was supportive, but cautious. They didn't discourage me, but they asked questions. Why Australia? What will you study? What happens after graduation?
Those questions are heavy, but they're also grounding. They force clarity. They force honesty. What did you realize about your decision during those conversations?
I realized that this dream wasn't just mine anymore. If I succeeded, they would feel proud. If I struggled, they would worry. If I failed, they would feel that too.
That's often the moment when a dream matures. It stops being personal ambition alone and becomes responsibility. And when responsibility enters, the decision becomes much more real. By this stage, did it feel like you were moving closer to a yes?
Yes, even though I still had doubts, I knew I was moving toward a decision. Something inside me was already leaning toward yes, quietly but steadily.
And that's where we'll pause for now, because in the final part of this episode, we'll talk about what happens after motivation and commitment are in place. The doubts, the paperwork, the waiting, the emotional preparation, and how imagining arrival becomes a way of coping with uncertainty. We talked about how curiosity turns into motivation and how motivation slowly becomes commitment. What I want to explore now is what happens after that commitment is made internally, even before anything is approved or confirmed. Because this stage is often the quietest, but also the heaviest. This is when doubt enters, when paperwork begins, when waiting tests your patience. So let's talk about that phase honestly. Once you were leaning toward yes, what was the next thing that started occupying your mind?
Doubt. Not loud doubt. Quiet doubt. Questions about whether I was actually qualified, whether I was capable, whether I was aiming too high.
That self-questioning shows up for almost every international student, regardless of background. Even strong candidates suddenly start re-evaluating themselves. What were the doubts you found yourself returning to most often?
Grades, English proficiency, academic background. I kept asking myself if I was good enough, if I could really handle a different education system.
That's such an important moment, because doubt doesn't always mean stop. Often it means prepare. Did you notice that shift happening for you?
Yes, instead of giving up, I started preparing more carefully, researching requirements, understanding expectations. That helped transform fear into focus.
And then comes documentation, something people often underestimate emotionally. From the outside, documents look administrative, but for students, they carry meaning. What was that process like for you?
Preparing documents felt emotional. Each document represented effort, history, intention, academic records, English test results, statements. It felt like I was putting pieces of my life into a folder and sending them away to be judged.
That's such a powerful way to describe it. It's not just paperwork, it's vulnerability. And once documents are submitted, the waiting begins. How did you handle that waiting period?
Not very well at first. I checked emails constantly, refreshed portals, imagined different outcomes. I realized how little control I had and how uncomfortable that felt.
Waiting teaches patience whether we want it to or not, and it often forces us to confront our expectations. As time passed, did your thoughts shift from approval to departure?
Yes, once things started moving forward, my focus changed. I began thinking about leaving home, about what I would miss, about how much would change.
That emotional preparation is something many students don't anticipate. Leaving isn't just about packing bags, it's about separating from routines, identities, and comfort. What did that feel like for you?
It was heavy. Suddenly, familiar places felt different. Time with family felt more important. I realized I wasn't just leaving a country, I was leaving a version of myself.
That's such a meaningful insight, because migration isn't only physical movement, it's emotional transformation. Before you actually arrived, did you imagine what that first day in Australia might be like?
Yes, I imagined wide roads, different sounds, a sense of quiet unfamiliarity. I imagined feeling small at first, and then slowly becoming stronger.
That image of starting small is important because growth doesn't happen instantly. It happens gradually through exposure and persistence. Now, after 6 months in Australia, when you look back at that early dream, how do you see it?
I don't think it was naive. Incomplete, maybe. Idealistic, yes. But necessary. Without that early dream, I wouldn't have had the courage to start.
That's something I hope listeners really hear. Dreams don't need to be accurate, they just need to be honest enough to get you moving. As you look ahead now, what does the future represent for you?
I don't have a perfect plan, but I have direction. I know this journey is changing me, and that matters more than certainty.
Let's pause and reflect on a few key thoughts from today's conversation. Every international student journey starts quietly, often with curiosity, not confidence. Motivation matters more than destination. Your reason for coming shapes how you handle challenges. Fear doesn't mean weakness, it means you care. And growth begins the moment you take responsibility for your choice. Pema, thank you for sharing this part of your journey so openly.
Thank you. It was meaningful to revisit this stage and reflect on how it shaped everything that followed.
To everyone listening, if you're still at the dreaming stage, that's okay. This podcast is for you. In our next episode, we'll talk about family expectations, the support, the pressure, and the unspoken responsibility that often comes with studying overseas. If you found this episode helpful, feel free to like the video and share it with someone who's thinking about studying in Australia. And if you'd like to follow the rest of this journey, you can subscribe to the IgniteLife Consulting channel. It helps us continue creating thoughtful, practical conversations like this. Thank you for listening. We'll see you in the next episode. Until then, take care and remember, every big journey starts with a quiet thought.